Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just a second. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to today's webinar on raising the sustainability bar. We're really excited to have you. We're going to jump right in. Just as a quick introduction, for those not familiar with myself and Socialsuite, my name is Seth Foreman. I'm the CEO at Socialsuite. And for those not familiar with us, Socialsuite is a sustainability and impact technology company. We offer simple and affordable sustainability and impact solutions with a specialization around materiality assessments. Today, we have over 100 public and private companies, and we've now been around over 9 years, founded in 2015. And to jump in, just before we go through and meet our speakers today, I do want to go through a couple housekeeping items. One is that today's webinar will last about 30 minutes of content, and then we're going to move into Q&A. If you do have any questions, you'll see on the right-hand side of the portal, there'll be a little chat icon. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the conversation, and our speakers may in real time answer your question, or definitely by the end, we'll go through that during Q&A. The recording of today's webinar will be distributed to everybody that's attending today within a couple days after the end of the event. Now, let's go and meet our speakers today. So we're gonna, I'll ask Dan, if you don't mind introducing yourself first, and then we'll go to Tim and we'll jump right in. So Dan, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dan Lapovitz, the CEO of the Green Impact Exchange. I'm formerly a executive from the New York Stock Exchange, running regulatory policy and rule interpretation and interaction with members. Was then a consultant for about 10 years and have been working with GIX for about the last 2.5 years.
Thanks, Dan. And over to you, Tim.
Excellent, thanks. My name is Tim Siegenbeek van Heukelom. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Socialsuite, and I've been working for over a decade with small to large companies across a variety of jurisdictions to really help them build and set up their sustainability programs and get really into the detail of reporting.
Thank you. All right, so now that we're going to launch in here, I will be passing the baton over to Tim. I'll come back in at the end of the session to help with Q&A. Thank you very much. Good luck. Go for it, Tim.
Excellent. Thanks, Seth, for that introduction. And Dan, it's a pleasure to have you here today. What I'll do is I'll take everyone quickly through the outline of today's webinar. And then I'll get back to you, Dan, straight away to talk a bit more about the Green Impact Exchange. I think a lot of people want to know what that is and how it works. And it will set the scene for today's discussion around investor grade reporting, which is, you see the middle of the slide here. That's really about the main topic we'll be talking about today. But to set that scene, we'll start with a little discussion around if investors can trust sustainability data and information, and is there a trust issue? What does that look like? Then we'll get to that discussion about investor grade reporting on sustainability. And of course, we don't want to leave you today without some actionable things that you can actually take to heart and take back to your business and think about, like, how can you move forward? So some practical things we'll end with. And throughout, as Seth mentioned, the webinar discussion today, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat box on the right-hand side. It really it helps us to focus our information on what's most relevant to you. We might pick them up throughout the webinar, or we'll get back to the end and have a bit more discussion on your questions today. So that's the outline. But first off, then the Green Impact Exchange, really exciting kind of new initiative that's coming. Can you tell us a little bit about how it works? And I've got an image here from your side that takes a little bit through, I think, like some of the components there. But we'd love to hear from you what it is, how it's going to work. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to talk to everybody. So GIX is a brand new stock exchange, a registered national securities exchange in the United States for listing and trading of the stocks of companies that are either already sustainable or on their way to becoming sustainable. the initiating problem that we were talking about is the current market forces and market participants hinder the ability of investors to really reward the efforts of green companies and to help establish and sustain companies that are on that journey. So my colleagues and I, my co-founders and I, are all former NYSE executives. As I mentioned, I was the head of the regulatory policy shop, and one of my co-founders, Charlie Dolan, was the CEO of one of the trading firms on the floor. Our third co-founder was the executive vice president who ran the NYSE trading floor, and our fourth co-founder was the global head of compliance for the NYSE, and then the head of the chief regulatory officer for the National Stock Exchange. And the four of us had a consulting firm together, and we had clients who were engaged with ESG questions and trying to sort of integrate ESG and capital markets. And we began to observe several shortcomings in how the market was reacting to ESG, starting with E plus S plus G equals really doesn't tell you anything because it's trying to tell you everything all at once. And so we said our first observation was you have to disaggregate the various aspects. So we were focused only on the E, or the environment, and only on the sustainability aspect. The second thing we observed is that all of the data and metrics that you get was backward looking and was episodic. It told you things that happened last year, but didn't really give you a sense of what was going to happen next year. And then the third observation was it was all voluntary and there was no accountability. So that a company could change course mid-stride and there was really no consequence. There was no way to hold them accountable. And then finally, we realized that when you boil down all of these issues, it really comes down to corporate governance. It really comes down to, is there an infrastructure inside the company that would allow the company to prove that it was serious about its promises? And from our perspective, with respect to at least public companies, when you talk about corporate governance, that is something that exchanges have traditionally offered to companies and to investors. If you think back to before the SEC, when it was just the exchanges as self-regulatory organizations, the NYSE only listed certain companies. They didn't list every company. And the companies they listed made an implicit promise to investors that the information they would give would be quality information, that the information would be standardized in a way that investors could understand, that investors would be treated fairly and their interests would be prioritized, and that management wouldn't take actions that would essentially be duplicitous. If you fast forward to today and you look at the ESG landscape, none of those things are really true when it comes to reporting. There's no guarantee the information is consistent. There's no guarantee that investors are being treated fairly and given reliable information, and there's no reliability that management is going to treat investors and stakeholders fairly when it comes to sustainability reporting. So GIX, we set out to become an exchange. So we would be able to list companies on our exchange and be able to hold them accountable for their sustainability promises. Two very important notes to what I just told you. First of all, we are dual listing companies, which means that a company that's currently listed on the NYSE or NASDAQ doesn't give up its listing to come list on GIX. They add it as a second listing. And the second very important caveat is that we are not in the business of verifying that a company is or is not green. We're not here to judge a company or rate them or anything like that. We're here to validate and verify that the information they're giving to investors is accurate, true, has good controls around it, and then let investors do the thing that investors do, which is decide if they're going to allocate capital. If you go back to the NYSE example for a minute, the NYSE doesn't verify a company is profitable. They don't verify that a company is in a good business or has a good business model. They verify the quality of the information that an investor gets. And if a company says, we're going to make 5 cents a share, and they only make 2 cents a share, they get pummeled by the market. And if they say, we're going to make 5 cents a share, and they make 20 cents a share, they get rewarded. So it's the same thing with sustainability. So what we set out to create was a fair playing field that would allow sustainably minded investors to make decisions based on quality information. To get there, and this goes to the slide that Tim has up on screen, we have 3 pillars that underlie our standards. The first one is about the board and the tone from the top. So the company establishes that it's committed to green and sustainability efforts. Either it's committed to getting started or it's committed to continuing. And the board does this by, first of all, publishing to investors, here's what we as a company are committed to, or call it, your 2050 goal, for example. The second thing is that the board needs to set up robust oversight. The board commits to, at the highest levels of the company, conducting real oversight of the company's sustainability efforts. At the management level, the thing that we're asking companies to do is to create a set of interim goals that lead you to that long-term goal. Because one way to know if a company's on track is to say, where are they now, and are they close to the next waypoint? If they're not close to the next waypoint and they're really off course, I'm not confident that they're going to make it to their long-term goal. And then also, what is the company's strategy? If the waypoint is X, does the company's strategy support getting to whatever X is? And I'll use the example of an airline. An airline says we're going to be carbon neutral by 2035 by having all sustainable aviation fuels. Well, if you read anything about SAF, what you know is there's not going to be enough sustainable aviation fuels by 2040. There just isn't manufacturing capacity, refining capacity. So if that's the airline strategy, I know they're going to miss. So I'm not going to rely on that information. But if the strategy they disclose is a combination of better routing, more fuel efficient engines, different configurations of planes that are more carbon neutral per passenger, then I know the company is serious, and I get to understand the seriousness. So that's values and vision. And then the third piece is verification. So we're not creating a new standard. We're asking companies to use one of the existing standards, whether it's SASB, TCFD, GRI, CSRD, and to commit to using it consistently and accurately, and backing that up with limited assurance that says they have the proper controls in place to ensure that they follow the rules of the reporting mechanism they're using. And that lets investors know that if the company is measuring and reporting what it's doing, if it's out of alignment, there's an opportunity for the company to get back into alignment. And the combination of those things gives you the confidence as an investor that the company is actually serious about doing what it said, that it's aligned its incentives with that. The manager who's in charge of the widget factory isn't being incentivized to produce as many widgets as possible with no consideration for the environmental impact, but instead is being given resources and skill and employees and incentives to integrate the sustainability into the ordinary business as usual processes of the company. So I'll pause there, Tim, and let you jump back.
I think that's a very comprehensive overview. Thanks for that, Dan. And I think the main thing that stands out to me is there's a lot of companies out there that already, to some degree, have the values, they claim that are committed to sustainability, they have a vision, they might have even a strategy. But I think it's that component, the third one there on the verification, the actual behaviors in terms of sustainability practices and reporting, where there's a lot of, I think, problems that investors face, challenges that they have with information, consistency, usefulness of information, transparency there. So there's a lot that can happen there still to really make sure. And I think, to your point, people know that, you need to do that properly to be listed on the GIX. That would make a difference, and it would really help great companies drive to make sure that they do that consistently and don't go on a bit of a pearl hunt there where they pick some disclosures that they tend to like and leave others behind, but really follow the letter of particular standards. So with that, I think it does open the door then to the question right now, if a lot of companies are not doing that, and if there is a need for something like the Green Exchange, then that seems to flag that investors at the moment are not entirely trusting data and information, not getting what they want and what they need. And I think we spoke previously about that. There's a large chunk of investors there that think that sustainability reporting today, at least largely, features unsupported claims. And of course, that's what we worry about. Can you say a little bit more about that?
But you have the exact statistic that I was looking at, the PwC survey that said 87% of investors don't trust the information that they're getting. They think that they're getting information that is not verified in some way. And there's a companion study by Nuveen that found that a majority of their investors showed interest in shifting to strategies that only invest in net zero carbon companies. So there's this mismatch. Investors are hungry for this information, but 87% of them don't trust that what information they're getting is either supported or accurate. And in our experience with companies, there are a lot of companies that are doing good things. They're doing what I'll call the right things when it comes to being on their sustainability trajectory. And there are two frustrations. One is either they don't know how to get from point A to point Z, so they're looking for a roadmap. And the other is that they've got a pretty good idea of where they're going, how they're getting there, and they're being lumped in with the companies that are greenwashing, that are just, mouthing the words and not really learning them and not really doing it. And you see this with a lot of times companies continually reinforce that message, because you'll see a big splashy announcement often around COP 27, 28, whatever the next one is. We're going to do whatever it is. Think about GFANs, or think about all of the other things that the banking community was going to do. And very quietly, or sometimes not so quietly, they have rolled those back. And so I think investors have learned you can't trust what you read. And that to me is a huge problem. It means you can't make reasoned investment decisions.
A good point there. And I think that is a large problem in the market that we see. There's a lot of talk, a lot of commitment, but not a lot of accurate actions there in terms of both the practices and the reporting on those actions. So if we take that as the context, then the big question then is, how do we solve that problem, of course? So how do we make sustainability data more investor grade and look after what people want? And there's a number of strategies and tactics that you can run through. And I think a good starting point often is to ask, like, what do investors really require? So what is it that they're looking for? And let's take three of them here. They're looking for decision useful data. So they don't want to be overwhelmed with everything under the sun sustainability. They're looking for things that are actually useful to make a decision on, but also for data that is comparable and that is standardized and that is based on a ESG or sustainability standard, to your point that you made earlier, Dan. And it needs to be transparent and repeatable, and it needs to be accurate data. So there's all those components there that company needs to take into account, because that is what investors are after. So if we take that, then how can you respond to some of those components? And what I want to do is pick out three of them that are quite interesting to just unpack a little bit. So how do we raise the bar? In the next few slides, we'll go through the first one, that is conducting a materiality assessment. So really that sort of response to decision useful data. You need to work out what is relevant to your particular business. Not everything sustainability is relevant to your business, and investors don't care about everything sustainability. Like with financial reporting, you need to work out what crosses that financial materiality threshold, and that's what investors want to know. The same thing goes with sustainability. So let's talk about that a little bit. We'll then jump into what standard do you use then? So there's a lot out there. We'll have a really quick kind of brief overview and talk a little bit about that. And then the third one is, what is reporting now really? And we'll get into that question around that. Why do companies report? So the first one then, that materiality question there, we see it more and more, and out of Europe it's coming, that it's now mandated as part of the sustainability reporting directive. Companies have to do a double materiality assessment every year to inform their sustainability reporting and practices. But why is materiality so important, and what does it really mean?
Well, I think, materiality is one of those words that has kind of lost its meaning through overuse, because it's a legal standard. So there is case law out there that says a fact is material if, and then there's a series of tests. A reasonable investor would consider it important to their investment decision. And when you start to break down, well, how do I know? And it's a little bit like, you know it when you see it. But that's not really helpful if you're talking to a sustainability professional or to a legal professional saying, is this thing material? So I think you really have to come back to the first principle about, is this important to the person who's receiving the information? And importance can mean different things to different people, but fundamentally what you're asking. And an example that I have often used is that, so I observe Jewish dietary laws. I don't eat certain foods. If I do eat them, nothing is going to happen to me. I'm not going to get struck down by God. I'm not going to, have to commit any, do anything to expiate my sins. Nothing's going to happen. But nevertheless, that information is important to me because it has a meaning to me. So in some way, like if you think about what would an investor say, I wish I had known that. I wish someone had told me whatever that thing is. That's what you get at when you're talking about materiality. You don't get lost in the definitions if you start with what's really important to the people I'm talking to. And I see you have on the screen about assessing the good and bad potential outcome and how to do that. So if you want, I can jump forward to that question of how do you begin to take, okay, well, how do I know if it's important and whether it matters? And one of the answers to that is we do this all the time in our lives. We say, okay, how likely is something to happen? And then if it does happen, how bad is it going to be? And it could be, I pick my child up from daycare. If I'm late, they charge me a fee. For every 5 minutes I'm late, I get charged $5. So how likely is it I'm going to be late? And if it does happen, how bad is it? How much is it going to cost me? That's a materiality assessment, as simple as it sounds, because I'm measuring on two scales. Am I often going to be late? No. But are there going to be times? Yes. So now I can start to create a discount. Well, I'm late once a month and it costs me $10 every time I'm late. So over the course of the year, it costs me $120. So that's such a bad thing? I don't know. That might be immaterial to me. On the other hand, if I'm late every day and now it costs me essentially $2,000 or $3,000 to be late, that's material. That's bad. So the magnitude of the harm and the likelihood that harm is going to happen play off of each other. And that becomes important. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the procrastinator problem in a few minutes, but let me pause there, Tim, and let you go into your next question.
No, I love it, like how you can, make these things really practical. Because like you said, materiality has been overused. A lot of people still kind of, they get that it's about how something important, how do you apply that then? And how do you think about that in more kind of, practical and real terms is really useful. So thanks for that example. Now, why is it important to investors? And I think that comes back to the point earlier. It's about there's all this information, but investors have limited time and they're really just want to get to the world. How can I better understand this particular business based on information that is really decision useful to me? So I want to avoid insignificant information here. I don't want a report of 300 pages with everything sustainability under the sun. I want a report from you for 10 to 20 pages with the most important matters to this business from a sustainability point of view, the things I can quickly go through and understand. And what should be in there and what should you be reporting as a company? That's always the question. That's why you do that materiality assessment. But there's also then, and I think this is, what you like the investors challenge where companies are getting a little bit around, is this going to be a problem at one time frame, or a medium or long time frame problem? And that's where you get that this kind of more that procrastinator problem, potentially getting companies to a point where there's, they get to a certain panic moment, they assess things on the long scale, and suddenly the long scale becomes today, and have you done something about it or not? So then can you explain us a little bit, what is that procrastinator problem? How does that work?
Well, so there's an old saying that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. But that right there is the problem. So my son is no longer in daycare. He's now a senior in high school, and at the beginning of the semester, he's very excited. He's gung-ho. He's going to do his homework every day. He's going to study for the tests. And when the exam comes, he's going to be ready. And inevitably, the night before the exam, he's running around panicked because he hasn't studied. He hasn't finished the unit. He hasn't finished the module. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? That is a material moment. That is a critical moment where something bad has happened. And the question is, what could you have done to avoid it? And oftentimes, remember that when I was talking about the magnitude of the problem and the likelihood it's going to occur, that scale works for immediate problems and for what I'll call sort of ongoing possible things that could happen at any moment. The random occurrence that I'm going to, fall down is always there. I could trip over anything at any time. But the The problem with that is that there are lots of things that are never going to happen in the next reporting time frame. And climate change is the perfect example of a long dated, not going to happen in the next quarter problem. You know, the rise in sea levels is not going to cause damage to my inshore or my shoreline infrastructure in the next 90 days. It's just not. So therefore, the likelihood that thing is going to happen is zero. Even if the magnitude is huge, it's not material, because my materiality is the sum of an equation, or it's the product of an equation, likelihood of occurrence times severity when it does occur. If one of those two numbers is zero, then the materiality number is zero. So you get into this procrastinator problem where I'm showing you all of the things that are material because they're going to happen either immediately or they could happen in any minute. And I'm missing all of the things that are going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, until we get to 5, 10, 15, or 20 years from now, and I didn't plant the tree 20 years ago. So one of the things to think about when you're thinking about materiality is, what are the things that I should be doing now to prevent some harm later? And adding those back into your materiality calculation in some way, some meaningful way that says, if I don't do this now, 10 years from now, future me is going to be really mad at current me that I didn't do it. And so I need to start identifying what are those things that I need to do now to be prepared for the thing of the future. And one of the things, Tim, that you and I didn't discuss in our preparation was every company has a business continuity plan. You have sat down, all of you, I know, have sat down and said, if a fire happens at our major manufacturing facility, if a hurricane closes one of our offices, if our call center is destroyed by a tornado, whatever the thing is, we have all sat down and done that forward planning. And then we work backwards from that. We say, okay, well, what do I need to do today? So if my call center is decimated by a tornado, I need to have a backup site somewhere. I better do that now before the tornado hits, because otherwise I won't be prepared for it when it does hit. It's the same kind of thing with a long-dated climate-related or sustainability-related materiality assessment. If you don't do it, that's the procrastinator problem. If you do it, then you're OCD and you're well on your way to be able to sleep at night.
I love that. No, thanks for sharing that, Dan. And I think that is why we see there's more and more emphasis in doing that materiality assessment on considering the time horizon in there. You can't just look at short and medium term. You need to take that long term and take that serious and demonstrate that that has an impact on the long term, enterprise value of the business, but also at large, like how your business, interacts with the environment around itself. So it's really important to keep that in mind as well. Jumping over to the next component there, then I think
if I can add one thing before you jump on. In the last slide, you had a comment about the lofty goal versus the unlofty reality, and I think that is the flip side of this. That one of the things that we've noticed and why we were interested in GIX as a concept originally is that the investment world often doesn't get that shift, and they don't prioritize the investment in the things that you have to do now to prevent the bad things later. And it's either that you fail to plan for risks that may occur, or you fail to plan in a way that you'll be able to capitalize on opportunities that are coming down the road. So just to plug GIX for half a second, one of the things that we're trying to do is to help investors and companies make that shift, that investors who are thinking about long-term and companies who would benefit from that, to try to get that together. And there is some evidence of that. That companies that make that shift do better in the long term. They have better results, lower costs of capital, a whole bunch of reasons. But it starts with realizing that likelihood of occurrence times magnitude if it does occur. If it's always at zero, you never get there, and you need to think a little bit differently. Sorry, now moving on.
Good point. And I think that the outcome of that is that a lot of this thinking and sustainability work needs to happen really across the entire business. You can't have a sustainability officer, a lone ranger sit at a desk running, effectively the sustainability program, initiative, practices, reporting, and everyone else just continuing as 20 years ago, business as usual. And we have some on sustainability. Now, sustainability is everyone's job. It's cross-functional. It is from the highest level, the board, management, all the way down to day-to-day operations, manufacturing, whatever you do. It's across your value chain. It's upstream, it's downstream. everything needs to be taken into account to make sure you don't miss some of those material areas, and that everyone is contributing to actually get you there. Because you can only, at the board level, you can only do so much in terms of setting a vision and values and a strategy. But if you don't take the actual business with you to drive that implementation, you're not getting anywhere. So I think there's a lot that needs to happen there. Yeah.
It's true. I had a conversation with a chief sustainability officer at a large company, and I said to her, well, what's your definition of success? Expecting her to say something about how the company meets its green goals and whatever. And she says, my definition of success is that I'm out of a job. Yeah. That it's become so ingrained in all of the businesses, and the company is doing all of the things as part of its normal planning process, that you don't need a chief sustainability officer. It's just part of the DNA of the company. I thought that's both, it was inspiring and sad at the same time.
Yeah, and I think there will always be a role for people like that. Like the CFO is not going to say everyone, gets the accounting now, so I can go home. But you always need someone in charge there. But I think the point is right there. If everyone takes ownership there, you're getting to a place where you want to be with sustainable practices. Because in the end, it's all about a triple bottom line there. You want to make sure your organization, does better for people and for planet, but also profit. So you want to make sure, but everyone has a role in that.
Right.
So how do you raise that bar? Well, what we looked at, second point, using a standard, ESG or sustainability standard. Now, the challenge has been with sustainability reporting in the market there that a lot of the sustainability reports are, put it in quotation marks, they are marketing information. They're really glossy, nice marketing reports, really, done up as a sustainability report. I think it's getting less so, and in particular out of Europe now with the legislation coming in there. A lot of people are realizing that investors are asking not for the marketing copy, but the actual disclosure table with deep information that is comparable and decision useful. So there's a trend that it's getting better. There's a lot of that information in those, let's call it the marketing glossies, that is non-material information. It's great case studies, and I've seen a lot of them about, helping the local school or the football club and sponsoring the jerseys, and it's all great. Engagement, stakeholder engagement. There's a lot of good stories there, but it's not always per se the really comparable, robust information investors are looking for. And with that, you see that a lot of reports are really pretty selective. That even if they go into picking out some actual disclosures, they take the ones that have information on, or the good ones, or the ones that are not uncomfortable with. And that leads to reports that can look pretty heavy and glossy. 80 pages of glossy, but really if you read it, there's not a lot that is actually meaningful to investors. So with that, to your point earlier, there's been a lot of a wave of, and I'll jump to that slide now, a wave of voluntary reporting over the last years, where you see there's all these standards and frameworks, and there's a lot happening in that ESG space. And I think mostly the core here, that disclosure standards, that's where we've seen a lot of progress in the last year or two. There's a lot of consolidation, harmonization, and if you think about what we really have from voluntary reporting now, there's really two big standards: the Global Reporting Initiative, which are more focused on impact materiality, how is your business impacting the world around it, and you have then the International Sustainability Standards Board, part of the IFRS Foundation, and they've absorbed things like TCFD and SASB, and they are really looking at what are the risks and opportunities from a sustainability point of view that are facing your business. So more the sustainability related financial materiality of risk and opportunities out there. So there's a lot that's made this alphabet soup of voluntary reporting a lot more manageable. And in the last few days, both of those two standard setters are actually gonna work even better together, so that you get one seamless reporting standard. So there's a lot to be excited about in that voluntary reporting space. So it's easier potentially now to start reporting. But just when you think you're getting ahead and you're getting a grasp of what's going on, you're hit by a wave of mandatory disclosures. And this is only scratching the surface of what's going on globally. But Europe is leading the pack. There's no doubt or question about that. There's a lot happening there in Europe. But a lot of jurisdictions are now following. Some of them are using some of those voluntary standards out there that are just flagged and making them into their own flavor or shape in their jurisdiction. But what it means is that there's now a whole set of draft or emerging and incoming mandatory compliance regimes around sustainability. So with those two things in mind, I think is really important for companies that do want to provide those investor-grade data points, around sustainability, is to look at first what is coming your way from a mandatory perspective. What do you have to do? Like, there's no question, you have to do some of these things here. But then also go back and think, are there any particular things that might not be in my kind of jurisdictional requirements that I need to do from a compliance perspective that actually are required by our investors? Because I think from a mandatory perspective, we're not there yet. A lot of it is focused on climate, which is important, but that is leaving out a lot of the other environment things, biodiversity, but also the S and the G there. So there's still a lot to say for looking as well at those voluntary reporting standards. Not all of them like this, but the big ones. And really going through that and work out what are some of the key things that you can report on. Because once you have a standardized, set of disclosures, that is what investors are looking for. They're not caring about it. Those glossy photos. They want to go to the back to the appendix and get a GRI or SSB table and do that for 3 or 4 companies in your industry and put it next to each other. And really, data point by data point, compare how you're stacking up, how you're doing. Is it consistent with your previous report?
So first of all, I love slide 12 with the mishmash of voluntary reporting standards, because it just tells you people want a solution. There has to be a solution because this is not going away. And then I also, slide 13 with the map, the U.S. is so clearly lagging behind in this. Putting on my lawyer hat and not endorsing any political view one way or the other, the SEC rule, I think, is dead. I think the SEC climate rule got stuck in the Eighth Circuit, which is a very conservative court. It's going to stop the SEC under some doctrine evolving from the Supreme Court's major questions doctrine. I worry that that's not going to see the light of day. And yet it's 40% of the equities market is there. So there's this sense of well, it's good for GIX because we're trying to create some accountability in a place where there's very little of it, but it's also depressing because I look at that mishmash of voluntary reporting and I wish I could figure out how to get the US on board with the rest of the world. That's my own editorializing there.
Yeah. No, but we'll get there at some point. I think there is a lot of progress globally. And I think in the last 2 years, it's been quite exciting to see a lot of, compliance coming in globally. And it will take some time, but there's also a lot more in that voluntary standards where companies can actually really step up and do some of that work. But this is, and I think that's the final point for today then, before we kind of summarize and see if there's any questions, is a lot of talk about reporting, but why is reporting actually so important? And how does it relate to some of the other components around sustainability? And like in our pre-talk, like you flagged that reporting is really a forcing function. Can you talk to that a little bit, Dan? I found that a good concept for people to better understand it.
So it's not I'm not the first to come up with that. Louis Brandeis, who said sunshine is the best disinfectant and electric light the best policeman. But the smarter person is actually my wife, who is in charge of corporate communications for a Fortune 100 company and refers to communications as the forcing function. Because when you actually have to talk about something, the communicators go, well, what are we saying? Is that true? Does that have backing? Did it come from somewhere? Where did it come from? And people sit there and go, oh, yeah, no, that's a problem. And so it forces the conversation. So I think reporting comes from a good place. The more that you tell people, the more transparent you are, the more people will feel a combination of either pride or shame that I want to get this right, or look at me, I got this right. That it exposes where the holes in the argument are, or where the data holes are, or whatever. But I think we have gotten to the place that you talked about, Tim, where reporting has become reporting for its own sake. And if I never again see a photograph of someone crouching in a field holding a computer, because that's, or a person that looks nothing like a scientist holding a beaker and swirling it around like that, those photographs, I never want to see those again. Because that's reporting for reporting's sake rather than reporting as a function of, giving information. So what you have on the slide down at the bottom, I think are correct. It's a report should expose where the company is doing well and where it's not doing well, and incentivize management to fix that thing or to improve and build on whatever they're doing right. And it should be an opportunity for the company to say, however we're doing, can we do this better? Can we make this process easier, simpler, cheaper, faster, more impactful, whatever it is? Can we do it better? And then can we prove it? Can we show progress year over year? And I think that's one of the other things that reporting should do, is provide the context for the data that you're going to get. A narrative report's great at providing context. We were here, now we're here, we're going there. The challenges we had going from where we were to where we are were these, and here's how we're addressing those challenges. The challenges we see going from where we are to where we're going to be are X, Y, and Z, and here's how we intend to address those challenges. That's all narrative data context. And here's how we prove that we made it from point A to point B, and how we're going to get from point B to point Z. And that to me, I think, is, if you get those things, the context, which is the narrative, and the data, which is the prove it part, then you get to what I think is reliable information. Investors go, oh, Dan and Tim Incorporated is telling me the truth. They're trying their best. They may have messed up. They may have made a mistake along the way, or not gotten as far as they should have in this time frame, but I understand why and how and what they're doing about it. Versus it's a black box, or MSCI says they're a B plus, and Dow Jones says they're an A minus, and S&P says they're a C minus. I don't know who to trust.
Yeah.
So that I think is where you get to that problem.
That's spot on. And so the main thing there, I think, for a lot of companies that are thinking sustainability and equating it just with reporting. Well, the reporting is about action first. So what are you doing within your business to be greener, cleaner, more efficient? It is about that triple bottom line. How can you do better business to improve, the outcomes for people, planet, and profit? So that is the aim, and then your reporting tells you how you've gotten there. And I think the point you flagged upon, that it's not just numbers, it's not just the data points there. That is it's supporting, and it's really important to track that. But the narrative is really getting a lot more attention these days as well. It's really about explaining how your governance systems work, how you're doing certain things, how you got from A to B. So it's almost like you need to collect definitely data sets, but you also need to put it in a narrative so people can actually understand what you're doing and how you got there and where you're going from there. So if we take all this that we've just gone through in the last half hour or so and trying to make something kind of somewhat sensible take away action out of that, we've tried to do that in I think 6 short ones. I'll quickly run through to them. We're kind of getting running out of time, so I would say I'll run through that. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll after this get back to Seth and see if there's any questions that we can answer there. So the first one is what we looked at early in the webinar, is like having that focus, is really making sure that you determine with the materiality assessment what area should you focus on, what is material, what should you be reporting on, and what should you be doing. So the action, the practical side of sustainability. Once you know that in those particular areas, you can set some goals, long-term goals. You can commit oversight and accountability at the highest levels, and use that then to build, in point 3, the infrastructure to actually implement, on an operational level, how you can achieve those goals. So that's the doing there, the how. Now you do want to track that, so you do want to have a plan to, have some kind of waypoints that investors can see, and guideposts, like how you're actually measuring up to that long-term ESG sustainability or business plan that you put in place. You do need to measure that then, of course. So you do need to set, measure, and report how you're tracking. And some of those things could be KPIs, could be particular, information you report to investors. And your standardized ESG reporting and sustainability reporting, use those standards to demonstrate where you are, and do that, on a periodic basis. Most companies report it on a yearly basis. And then finally, where we started the webinar, just to close the loop there. And if you're doing all that, you're doing well, then, look at the GIX to do all this and demonstrate to the world that you are doing all these things. Because that's how people know. Like, it's great if you do all these things, but if you don't tell anyone, how can the world know? Any final thoughts or comments from you on this, Dan?
Well, no, I always appreciate the plug. But I think it's very important that all of this comes down to, if you start with what is important for either the reason that it's immediate and about to happen, or it could happen at any moment, or it's important because if I don't do it now, I will be in a panic later. And then that number one sort of sets the rest of the list. If you know what's important, then you know what to focus, what your goals should be. You can start to build the supportive infrastructure, make sure you achieve them. All of those things flow from, did I prioritize correctly? And does my prioritization not only include the things that are right in front of me, but the things that are maybe hidden by time that I need to know about and worry about? So I just want to remind people of that plug.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Now, if you're listening to this and you feel like, I do want to take action and get started, and you need some help there, I set flagged at the start of the webinar, we're materiality specialists and experts. We have solutions that can help you, take that first step to work out what is really important to you. So if you want to talk about how to get started or streamline your existing process, come have a chat to us. With that, I want to invite Seth back to the stage and see for our Q&A if there are any questions that people, either send directly to Seth or put in the chat there, and see what we can do to answer and then wrap up this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That was a fantastic conversation. You touched on so many great items about raising the sustainability bar, about materiality assessments, voluntary frameworks, mandatory frameworks. I did get a couple direct questions. So one individual out of the audience asked about, essentially, there's so many in that slide that you had with all the different frameworks that are out there. I'll start with Dan, but what's your recommendation around which actual framework that they should start with? It's quite a general question.
You start at A and you work your way through to Z, and you know. So from GIX's perspective, we try to be as interoperable as possible with the existing environment. Millions of hours literally have been spent building those various frameworks, and so we're not trying to supplant those. Our view is there are 6 or 8 that I think we could all kind of agree on are the generally accepted ones. ISSB and GRI and CSRD. There are some that have bubbled to the top. So our view is, if you are reporting to one of those 6 or 8 kind of core standards, then you're giving good information to your investors. If you're, a palm oil producer and you're looking at the certification for the Palm Oil Producers Union, I don't know how useful that is, how robust that is, whether that has the same level of broad utility. So my recommendation is try to focus on the ones that are, what's the herd using, and see if you can follow those.
Great, thanks, Dan. Let me just check. Okay, then there was another one where someone asked, our company hasn't started at all. So, what's your recommendation on the first or second step of how we should get started on our sustainability journey?
Call Tim, call Seth. That's my first recommendation is the first step is to want to take a step, to commit that this is something we want to do. Once you do that, gathering even the most basic information is already a step up, because it allows you to start seeing where are the holes. As Tim and I discussed, it's a forcing function. If I start to gather information, I go, oh, I don't have information on fill in the blank. I better get that, or figure out how I'm going to get that. Well, guess what? You're already starting your sustainability journey. Once you get there, then I actually think whether or not you are listed on GIX, our listing standards create a framework of the values vision verification that is a framework that any company can use for kind of any core values-based thing that they're doing. It doesn't just have to be environment. It's where are we going? Are we committing to robust oversight? How are we getting there? How will we know when we're off course? And then what are we reporting back to the stakeholders who care about this thing?
That's great. Okay, that concludes our Q&A here. So just to wrap up, again, thanks for joining, everybody. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Green Impact Exchange and telling your story and giving all these amazing insights to our audience. We really appreciate that. Again, for everybody in the audience, we will be sharing the recording. On the left-hand side, you have Tim's email address along with my email address if you do have any questions, or again, if you're interested in getting your journey started, come reach out to Socialsuite.
And Seth, I wanted to say publicly thank you for the opportunity to address your cohort. We really appreciate that. And if anybody wants a really deep PhD level dive on this, there is a forthcoming article in the Dickinson University Law School Law Review that talks about materiality and time as a factor in materiality. Tim and I talked about presenting it here. We decided that would be a snooze fest, and we'd rather talk about what we did talk about. So,
all right. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.